There's so many ways that even a left brain dominant approach can learn to be flexible enough to think different ways. Essentially, your intelligence is mutable. It's bigger than we think it is. We're very
Yeah.
much conditioned to use and access only certain parts of it. Back to why we need to be having this conversation. There's so much intelligence available to us. And that intelligence includes where we overlap the sensing body.
What if your body is not something you have, but is something you are? Welcome to the Brilliant Body Podcast. I'm your host, Ali Mazet, somatic therapist and sexologist with a lifelong fascination for the challenges and opportunities that come with being the bodies that we are. Join me and other body masters as we explore the art, science, and brilliance of the body and debunk the mind-body split by expanding the meaning and experience of intelligence, which goes way beyond just thinking. So let's dive in. My next brilliant guest, Rachel Fell, is a coach, consultant, and collaborator working at the intersections of neurodiversity, living intelligence, perception, and embodied awareness. For over 6 years, Rachel's worked with gifted, neurocomplex, sensitive, and intense adults around the globe, co-exploring in the service of full-body intelligence, their unique paths to realization and fulfillment. A published author, speaker, and teacher, Rachel also consults and collaborates with organizations on intelligence and its development, on leadership, and on brand identity. She also helps people create the business projects they are so ready to bring into the world. It is with pride and pleasure I welcome back to the Brilliant Body Podcast my friend and business coach, Rachel Fell. Here we go. Hey, Rachel.
Hello. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well. Settling in. Had a session this morning, went for a nice long walk by the lake. Yeah. And now I'm here with you.
Yay. Yay. Well, I'm always thrilled to be with you. I got to be with you yesterday for our coaching call, which was fantastic as always. And we talked about so many things, some of which hopefully we'll loop back around to today. But I just wanted to start with, let's begin with the basics. What is neurodiversity in your view and in your experience?
Sure. It's funny how over time we discover these little sound bites or shorthands that really work to communicate something that we really mean. And I'd like to start with neurodiversity is an extension of biodiversity because I feel like that frames it in a way that hits the spot for me. People seem to respond to that. This reality of unseen diversity of the viscera of the species. Allie and I both have human connective tissue, but how is our human connective tissue different? You might have more elastin or collagen, for example. Patterns, differences, how our nervous system functions, meaning and association, and how that's all stored. It all lives in the unseen territory of the insides of the body. So neurodiversity is this unseen diversity, and then you can say within a species. So yeah, that's where I like to start.
I love that because it normalizes it. I have to say, neurodiversity, even though we're in a heyday of neurodiversity and all this is being acknowledged as existing, this much complexity in the world and all the different ways that we show up and are wired and respond to ourselves in the world. But comparing it or including it in how nature itself is that way with an infinite, unfathomable spectrum of difference. It alleviates something in me to hear it compared or included in biodiversity. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we've become quite ocular. We have a lot of senses. We're going to talk a little bit later about the sensing body, I like to call
Yeah.
it. The reality of what we can't see is valid And yeah, just that staggering complexity at scale and in a species. We look at biodiversity and we look very much at the form and the species and these sorts of things, the ecosystemic intelligence. And we are a part of that. And so, right off the bat, we're going around this human identity interface of exceptionalism, which is good. Yeah.
Wait, what does that mean? Because when you were describing that, all of a sudden I went to this film I saw last night that I absolutely loved about incredibly brilliant, bright creatures or whatever that thing is about octopus.
Mhm.
From the octopus's perspective, which is obviously a human writing that script who scientifically knows apparently that they have 8 tentacles, but that they can see, smell, and know
Mhm.
a vast amount of information through each one of their tentacles and each sucker on their tentacles. The amount of intelligence that is
Yes.
in this other species. So when you were mentioned exceptionalism, I'm not sure if you meant
Yeah.
that humans, of course, like to think of their particular brand of intelligence as being superior
Mhm.
to every other species,
Yeah.
which of course is not the case in my view and in my experience. I'm dazzled. The species I'm closest to is dogs, and my dog in particular, who has all kinds of intelligence that I certainly don't have.
Mhm.
So, again, including it in biodiversity, I love that it just automatically expands even what we consider to be intelligent, which you and I
Yeah.
talk about a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, you're speaking to it's this German term I learned. What book did I learn that from? Immense World, Ed Yong. Umwelt is the term. And essentially, the design, the living physiology of the organism is the basis of its perception. And that when we're talking about intelligence, what we're talking about is processing, perception, learning in the service of what? And that's a really interesting conversation that because of this human exceptionalism, and you and I know we really jam on the I think, therefore I am. And we really have these narrow definitions of intelligence that are very interspecies competitive, not ecosystemic, not full body. It's just a very different starting point, honestly, but a necessary one, and one that I think deserves a certain kind of hang out here for a while, y'all. We can say we know these things, but they're just so rich and full of embodied insights and aha moments and, yeah, sparks of connection.
yeah, because our particular intelligence or the particular way in which we use part of our intelligence limits our capacity to understand other kinds of intelligence, which is true as at least an industrialized part of our species, as well as any given individual. Obviously, we can only perceive the way this particular system can perceive and only
Yeah.
imagine how even somebody we know intimately is perceiving and processing. So, what about that, Rachel?
What about that wildly amazing and squishy philosophical question of the embodied subjective? Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Be it human or any other
Yeah,
species. Yeah.
yeah. Well, this gets into territory that I think existential health is a real domain of health. And whether we acknowledge that openly or we have channels, religion, where do we go to explore identity and meaning individually, collectively? Things like healthy ego and trauma, and even, yeah, questions of intelligence, these philosophical questions, which is actually these questions of what is fundamental to our understanding, our context around being human. And those would be maybe the same but different for everybody. That these are really important questions. And that for me, at least, there is a paradox that of being distinct and individuation and healthy individuation to be connected to an ecosystemic intelligence, the web of life and relationality. And this is the kind of language where people start down this line, and depending upon your personal experiences with these things, like how this language lands. But essentially, the idea, I think, is really that we are influenced and we are influencing. And so we have the opportunity to be curious about our own embodied subjective, not to normalize it, but to connect as fancy monkeys, a social species.
Yeah, but okay, let's just even take I'm taking the bait of the word existential because, of course, it's a very
Mhm.
can be a sexy and also intimidating word. And if we are getting back to the cornerstone of how we even experience our own existence and struggle with it for that matter. When you were talking about that, I was thinking about what if I had grown up in the jungle and was aware of the world in a
Mhm.
full bodied way and felt very much a part of the world in a way that I don't most of the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Obviously, my sense of existence is gonna be entirely different because I wouldn't be in that sort of slice and dice aspect of the brain that's always distinguishing and comparing and separating everything and everyone, so that that subjectivity is more like an incarceration rather than an opportunity, for example, in family constellation work, where that subjectivity becomes the basis by and through which we're able to experience others out beyond ourselves
Yeah.
because we're so deep in our full bodied experience of the intensely personal that it becomes this paradox of being almost communal.
Yeah, absolutely. I translate that as a capacity to inhabit one's direct experience. And even without too much translation or meaning making, the irony and the paradox of we are creatures who are creative and want to learn. We're explorers as a species. And the capacity to inhabit the ecosystem, to inhabit one's direct experience, and then to reflect on, to contextualize, to look at. I almost experience that now, these days at least, very much as like a range. It's a series of places I can be, if that makes sense. And I can be in the story, I can be in the state, I can be in the energy. I can zoom out and be curious about the spatiality and the context and the meaning and the association that comprises my narratives, or I can like just hang with the pine tree and we can merge. So for me, at least, it feels like a spectrum of connection and separation. My job or the opportunity is to notice when something is asking for my attention in my survival schema or in my process. But if I can just flow, I can just inhabit different zones of being, and that's cool. Analytical, fully primordial, nonverbal. Yeah.
I love that. And one of the things we talked about yesterday is in the embodiment world, how much it's either or. It can get into, okay, either we're cognitive minds without bodies, or we're bodies and shunning the intellect and the cognitive. And of course, you and I are hopelessly, inextricably dedicated to both.
Yeah, both and, right?
Both
Yeah.
and, baby. Yeah. So let's talk about that because, again, even in the neurodivergent world,
Mhm.
when I think about my, you could say, stereotypes or preconceptions about neurodivergent folks, I don't tend to associate it with being highly body oriented.
Sure. So, what I'd love to do is just take a step back to neurodiversity for a moment. So, we were talking about either or, both and. We're in a time where we're really looking at intelligence, AI, and this push to
Yeah.
integrate into everything. Even like I ran across this beautiful post this morning, just highlighting different types of thinking, cognition, divergent, convergent, creative, meta, liminal. There's all these different ways, even to think. Taking the time to really redefine and explore intelligence feels really, really important in this moment. Neurodiversity is a beautiful ride along that condenses so many concepts into a really neat, it's a triangle for me. And so it acknowledges that human beings at the species level were the same, that we have all these differences, both seen and unseen, known and unknown, let's say. And then there's distinction in the third corner. So there's no other Ali Wazay. There's no other Rachel Fell. All that's happening at the same time. So again, it's this beautiful tool for the beginning of an unwinding around the binary and this sorting hat. It's, oh, I can be both the same and different because humans are the same and different. If there's an unconscious drive, let's say, to homogeneity for safety's sake. If you grew up around the kitchen table, it's like, I have to inhabit this culture. I have to be this way to be accepted. Neurodiversity really says it's, yeah, we're all humans and there's things that we share. we're all humans and there's these differences categorically. And that's where neurodivergence would come in, which is the sort of reductionist. There's the medical model, and then neurodiversity offers a different paradigm. And then you have distinction. And that sounds simple, but it really anchors non duality and this going beyond the binary at the human intelligence level.
So let's break that down further. That
Okay.
last sentence had all kinds of stuff in that.
Yeah, they're like these funny little suitcases, and then you open them up and
For
it's like,
sure.
"Ooh,
So
it's a whole" yeah.
let's just revisit non-duality
Mhm.
for folks that that term might be new to,
Sure.
or duality for that matter.
This or that, right or wrong, good or bad, or the slicing and dicing, and it must be one thing. So, big fan of science, love science. That's a reductionist methodology. We're isolating variables and we're measuring. A measurement is a snapshot in time. So we are against our own awareness, oftentimes unconsciously ingratiated with this reductionist type thinking. And so not only are we kind of like trained that way, which is great, it's a type of thinking, it is more convergent, let's say, but there's all these other kinds of thinking
Wait, what do you mean by convergent?
come together in an answer or a form or a statement. It's a moving towards.
And there's a consensus, a dominant consensus that rationality and scientific ways of measurement are more true, more real, more valid than
Yeah.
sensational understanding, for example.
Yeah. Consensus reality is co-created through the use of a methodology.
Yeah.
The first step in the scientific method is observe, though, and we have this cool metacognitive thing that's a different type of thinking. That is just straight up hanging out and observe. So just highlighting these differences, humans have these capacities. How do we get here? Oh, non-binary,
But
non-duality,
wait,
right?
I just want to emphasize this that in any given culture or in many cultures, there is a domination or a greater value set on certain ways of thinking.
Yeah.
Know this, but I just want to emphasize it for those of us who really have suffered in life by having to
Mhm.
try to fit a way of thinking that isn't necessarily our indigenous
Yeah.
way of processing information. And that doesn't necessarily mean we're neurodiverse, or maybe it does. I don't know. But
Yeah.
it does mean that we live in a very left brain, rational, dominant, domineering way of thinking that oftentimes has subsumed or suppressed more empathic ways of being, more emotional ways of being, more physical or even sexual ways of being.
Yeah. Yeah.
All those different ways of
Yeah.
being more, to use this term, more embodied in how we
Mhm.
think, perceive, and move through the world.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful. So now we're in the thickets of the jungle of conversation around convention and norms, and literally a very specific pathway that is somewhat explicit, but very implicit, honestly, of like how to think, how we're taught to think.
Yep.
And embodied cognition, embodied cognition, what does that even mean? I use that term a lot. And it's active processing and doing that in what I call a top-down way. There's so many ways that even a left brain dominant approach can learn to be flexible enough to think different ways. Like, essentially, your intelligence is mutable. It's bigger than we think it is. We're
Yeah.
very much conditioned to use and access only certain parts of it. Back to why we need to be having this conversation. There's so much intelligence available to us. And that intelligence includes where we overlap is the sensing body, I'll call it. For me, it's very physiological and directional. So the terms you introduced in our call yesterday, afferent and efferent, for example, it's like, well, my thoughts and emotions are physiologic processes. My sensing body is swimming in a sea of physics right now, and my skin is sensing where is all this experience coming from, essentially. So neurodiversity also gives us this opportunity when you pair that with redefining intelligence at a species level. Never mind even the distinction, because there is distinction and there are differences. But even at the species levels, what's possible? Because, like, I don't know that we're inhabiting all of it.
We're certainly not. Philip Shepard talks a lot about, oh God, what's that book he brings up and speaks to a lot? I'll put it in the notes, but it talks a lot about different tribal societies that have intelligences that sound supernatural to
Mhm.
industrialized people. How can you
Right.
possibly sense animals that are miles away? Or how can you possibly wake up and know things due to dreams or due to
Yeah.
people you've never met, or all these ways of sensing things that we relegate to the psychic or to the absurd for that matter.
Mhm.
And which is so astounding why humans have come to poo-poo and ostracize these different ways of accessing and enjoying intelligence
Yeah.
as if it's a threat somehow rather than a
Mhm.
privilege to expand our ways of
Right.
thinking, being, body, minding, whatever.
Mhm.
Or
Mhm.
they're not even good words for what this is. As you said, we talk about it in terms of felt sense. I'm using more sensational awareness, sensational consciousness has becoming more and more a favorite term of mine. But it's really difficult to even talk about how else we can quote unquote think because think
Yeah.
we associate with our verbal cognitive way of processing.
I think therefore I am is a very different thing than I am and therefore I think, or even take the justification out of it. I am and I think. It's so fascinating. But yeah, at this Umwelt level, at this species level, there's a lot of stuff that really has a lot of us carrying blank spots on the map, an incomplete schema around intelligence and even, yeah, our own experience with our own intelligence. So beautifully put, it's available to us. An over orientation to external validation. And at the same time, the embodied subjective, I imagine like a gathering of a less pack or social oriented creature. I don't know why foxes are coming up, but they're having a gathering. It's like, you guys can sense when there's a pack of coyotes like looking at you. And they're like, yeah, I can sense that. I can sense that. Well, can you measure it though? Can you prove it? And it's like the intelligence of the sensing body is connected to senses, attunement to environment, the ecosystemic reality, and then how we hold that certainty or not, how we offer that into exploration collaboratively. Again, back to the fancy monkeys thing. Can we hold things in theory? Do we need to measure? What do we need to measure and validate becomes a really interesting question.
What is proof? Why is proof in and of itself so important?
Yeah.
That's an interesting question.
Yeah.
Well, you need proof in order for something to be valid or valuable.
Hmm.
What does proof even mean? That it is, as you say, convergent, that more than one person can
Yeah.
agree to it and validate it?
Hmm.
So that what?
Yeah.
Why does
Well,
proof matter to certain humans so much?
yeah. Well, I do think we're all updating consensus reality through a collaborative understanding of the nature of being human. That is part of the explorer thing. And so back to existential health in other cultures, the meaning held around the stars, these structures. And we're like, what were they for? The way that they made meaning and how their reality came together. We can judge that. We can be curious about it. But that flow of phenomenology, expression, consensus reality building, back to just the power of validation. And this gets into, we do all have this unique, I believe, embodied subjective experience that for some people, there are neurodevelopmental differences, how your processing has changed after a traumatic brain injury, let's say, or neurodivergence as a real thing that is unseen differences in common human processing. And so we could stand an update on common human processing and intelligence. And then from there, there is, yes, there are people who have these, you can call them outlier, I suppose. This is where convention gets interesting. Convention becomes the main conversation around neurodivergence. What is normal? What is not normal? This is real and pragmatic for a lot of people in their lives, like supporting loved ones, family members with differences that make integration into how we live societally difficult. For some people, that integration is difficult, but they manage to do it, or it's a little less. So There really is this truth to neurodivergence, even if it is couched in convention and the systemic ways we live, if that makes sense.
Well, I'm bringing it to my own experience right now that I'm contending with, which is how sensitive my senses are.
Mhm,
So I no longer live in Los Angeles full time. I'm here right now. I'm
mhm.
astounded and dismayed by the amount of air traffic there is constantly in the places that I've been living while I'm here. And it's waking me up all through the night. And other people, most of the people who I've spoken to about it, they just shrug and they're like, yeah, well, and for me, it's alarming. All my senses are people would term me hypersensitive, which is, in my view, really a derogatory term I don't appreciate very much because there's judgment in it instead of this much noise can't be good for anybody, whether they're paying attention to it or not. This is a lot of noise that people, of course, become acclimated to. So, would you just talk about how people are termed, and certainly people
Mhm.
on the autistic spectrum can be termed hypersensitive or unable to cope with what lots of people consider to be normal levels of cultural circumstances or context.
Right. Really, really complicated. There's a lot going on in this stew of systemic expectations of humans, like learning in the service of, processing in the service of. And so, yes, we live in a capitalist reality and we're ingratiated into work, contribution, we have to pay rent and all these things. So I just want to name that layer is really important when we're having this conversation. From there, yes, processing differences back to neurodiversity is an extension of biodiversity. I've heard it said that neurodivergent people, very much like canaries in the coal mine, that the way that we're living is not in harmony with that planetary intelligence and that ecosystem. So, yeah, I am sensitive to this thing that is destroying the planet. Like, if we back out of our individual distinct identity, this particular cell on the body of the planet or this intelligence vector is not well suited to this environment because the environment, there's a clash there, and that there may be a greater intelligence at work when you think about humans and time and evolution and society. That being said, we can look at this psychologically. We can look at this in the medical. It's funny because psychology is medical, but they're separated. So we can look at this through the lens of physiology, connective tissue differences. When we explore your sensitivity, like if we were working together, I would have 4,000 questions about the nature of your sensitivity and how you experience your sensitivity. And human beings are porous. We do have more than just the sight. We have more than the thinking mind. We are affected by our environment. And so connective tissue density, differences in nervous system function, sensitivity in terms of neuroception, how our bodies gauge safety, what we experience as kiddos, but also, yeah, some of us just come out with these physiologic differences also that lead to being more sensitive. So that's looking at it through very much that anatomical perspective. There's the other one where we look at it through behavior, or the fit isn't working at work, or the fit isn't working at school. And so, yes, autism is very real. And they're really trying right now to bridge. It's like, well, when we say that, what are those physiologic and body based differences? Synaptic action, synaptic pruning, sensitive neuroception, differences in the sensory body, hyper, hypo. I'm so excited that we're moving in that direction finally. It is real. Differences in full body intelligence are real. And however we come to start exploring those, it could be through the lens of a diagnosis. It could also be the lens of fibromyalgia or Ehlers-Danlos, that kind of thing.
Mm. Yeah, more and more, I love the sensitivity of my senses and experience it. As Philip Shepard talks about, sensitivity is intelligence. It is how we interface with the wholeness of who we are, which isn't just our individual skin container. It's also how we interface with the world around us.
Mhm.
Now, that sensitivity also is, of course, very challenging, and it limits where do I want to live? Where can I live? Where do I thrive? Where do I not thrive? I have to make decisions. I have the privilege to be able to make some of those decisions, but not all, because you go out and live in nature around the sheep, which I do most of the year. And then I don't have humans around me very much. So there's pros and cons to everything. And yet I would not give up any of the quality of my capacity to feel and to see and to taste and to hear and all these things. I would not give it up in order to have an easier life, I would say. So there's that. But then there's also, I'm thinking about kids that I've known who will only eat white food and they won't eat anything that's not white. Can you talk about that? Because that's a body base. It's visual, it's textural a lot of the times. It seems really quirky to those of us that really like to eat green food and red food.
Yeah.
Other colors of food. What is that about? Because a lot of people would associate that with being like something's wrong. It's a pain in the ass. It's weird. All these things that a lot of neurodiverse and neurocomplex people have suffered.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah, those are two different explorations, even though they're the same. Humanity at large is neurodiverse. And there are varying degrees of neurodivergence, types of neurodivergence, neurotypes. We could say it that way. And is there a problem if there's no problem? Becomes a really interesting question. If the organism has a level of self-acceptance, if the environment is supporting them, if there is this flow and reciprocity in their life, is there an issue? Some people like to explore just at the level of who am I? And that takes us into this territory too. But what I'm talking about is like more or less urgency or the context framing the situation. Like a kiddo that experiences, it's either ARFID or AFID, I can't remember, but that often seen in neurodivergent kiddos, oftentimes correlational with autism profiles, that intensity of food restriction or orientation. Well, getting the kid to eat is the most important thing. And when we look at the whole context and we zoom out, it's like fed is best. And yeah, I'd love to be able to work with dietary influence with my kiddo. But if they won't comply to eating, I think that that's probably what I have to work with and deal with first. So we look at labels and language and diagnoses. It's sensory sensitivities around food, exploring with the kiddo the nature of their inner experience. That's a different approach than compliance or pressure, or let's say like behavioral modification. That's a more urgent situation. You were saying in your case, it's like, how do I engineer a life that honors my need for social engagement and novelty, but also space to decompress? And that's not that that's not urgent. It's just a different context,
Yeah.
different presentation, different neurotypes, different human beings. Self-attunement, if we did teach all of our kiddos, and especially in the service of our neurodivergent kiddos, self-attunement skills, that relationship with the sensing body, the somatics without needing to justify, without needing to have a why, how would things be different? If we included that warm data, how would things be different?
Okay, I want to get into that about what the body has to do with helping people be the diverse, unique beings that they are. But I just want to also ask, why is there so often a correlation between really high IQ and people who have these, what could seem from the outside like these odd quirks and preferences and
Yeah.
like what is that a correlation or
Yeah. Yeah. If I could answer that question with some sort of convergent definitive, that's a heck of an answer. We know what we know and we don't know what we don't know. And I like to honor that some of the things that we think we know, we don't know. Things like differences in synaptic action and pruning.
about neural pruning for those of us who don't know a lot about that?
Yeah, just that your body mind, as you move through life, there is a certain sort of information or connections, associations that are no longer necessary or needed. They might get pruned off. And that for some of us, and this is a neurodevelopmental, this is a neurodivergent thing, synaptic action can be faster. It can be in multiple locations. There can be more synapses and dendrites, these sorts of things. This is about the edge of my clinical and scientific. I go right about here. So we won't go down anymore, but that's a real thing. And so if you have more wires, more dendritic arbor, or let's say you have more elastin in your connective tissue, you may be more sensitive to things in your environment without even knowing it because you don't have a map for your sensing body. So your whole life, you're like, why do I feel so sensitive to things? There you go. Like you may have differences in connective tissue, synaptic action, nervous system function, all sorts of things, hypermobility that's connected to the connective tissue. So I hope that answers your question. But yeah, there's
Well,
differences.
I think you're
Mhm.
saying that there's likely, and there may be a correlation between having increased neural activity that may or may not be due to extra elastin, that there's more and faster varied neural
Yeah,
activity
but it's
that
nature and
can.
nurture too. You put 5 kiddos under a bright light, the one with the most porousness, that's the most sensitive to the light, their system's gonna be flooded with that. When you're a little kid, what does that do to your baseline nervous system function around withdrawing or being vigilant? So
Yeah.
threat and arousal are really central to this conversation too, and our understanding of trauma becomes really important to slow down and unpack at this point because we're talking about epigenetics, we're talking about the very real influence of environment on the sensing body, on the physical body. So, yeah, it's really fascinating stuff of which there are no easy answers. But yeah, as far as IQ goes, yeah, I work with gifted and ADHD and autistic and combinations thereof of adults. And yeah, these are folks that oftentimes more or less locked into that left brain way of being. The journey to coming into the sensing body is different for everybody. But the invitation is to go beyond these well worn neural pathways of meaning and association. There is more available to you. And in that process, that's another way to think about trauma healing is just allowing your physiology to do what it wants to do. There's survival schema, meaning and association around this vigilance, which is a part of being this way, but the sensitivity can be there with less, let's say, threat markers. We can learn to compost some of those.
Yeah, we've talked about that in that beautiful panel we had a while back, which I'll put a link in the notes. We talked about how trauma, is it a chicken or an egg with neurodiversity? And it's such an interesting thing. And I think maybe the question isn't, is it this creating this or that creating that? But as you say, the connective tissue is the connective tissue.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
is how the body is responding, not just sensationally, but as you say, in terms of the nervous system and how safe it feels and how it can process what's happened and how much of a community there is for any individual to process and make sense of whatever
Right.
has happened or could happen.
And so here we are again. We have these incomplete at best and at worst problematic and erroneous maps of human intelligence. For me, the body is the sub and unconscious. So I'm not willing my heart to beat. There is an intelligence. And I have this as a human being, this metacognition, this awareness of myself, which is inherently existential. It's like wild. So we don't know how other sentient creatures process and experience themselves. I don't actually know how you do. I just know how I do. But this invitation to go beyond a sense of self that is locked and controlled, people will be wanting out. I want to claw out. I want out of the matrix. I want out of this limiting space. And the invitation is to come into relationship with the sensing body. I work with a lot of highly intellectual adults who need new and updated maps, essentially, to give them permission. It's like, well, why would I go in and want to do this? And my identity is connected to being smart in a specific way. And so you're telling me that intelligence isn't just that. So there's a lot to get through sometimes. Or it's just sensitivity. It's like people fear their own feeling body because they are sensitive. So I think there's an invitation for all humans to connect with the sensing body, somatic intelligence. And for neurodivergent people, that can just be a little more complex sometimes.
Mm. So you're saying that even feeling can feel traumatic or
Yes.
traumatizing to people.
Yes, absolutely. And really engaging my own full body intelligence, learning cognition schemas, frameworks, but also just working with people. Yeah, there is more or less, let's say, complexity, or I experience it as spatiality, that reciprocity of bottom up and top down online. And we can learn to bring that into a place where it is. And that is just it's a beautiful thing. Neurodivergent, neurocomplex, humanity is neurodiverse. It's a beautiful thing for everybody.
Yeah, I have really early memories of being so emotionally overwhelmed
Hmm.
with anger, fear, sadness, helplessness, powerlessness. and not having any help regulating it, not having any accompaniment in those places, that I literally thought I was going to die. I thought I was going to explode. Like I thought my nervous system was going to self combust, basically.
Mm.
And I can certainly understand the fear. I don't know if that's what lots of kids feel from the Dr. Spock days of, oh, just let a kid cry themselves to sleep. There's been a lot of beliefs or just inherent limitations in parenting where you're supposed to just let a kid deal with their own nervous system overload until they get so overloaded, their whole system just shuts down.
Mhm.
That's an individual example of what we also do systemically and culturally to make sure kids don't feel too much so they're not disruptive to the whole in a classroom or in a family or in a society in any way. So, of course, we are systematically taught and trained to not feel too much physically or emotionally. And for that matter, sexually, let's not forget how much that is damped down. Our life force itself is
Mm.
conditioned to make sure that we don't feel too much. So it's not surprising that whether somebody is neurodiverse or considered that way, or seemingly totally normal and some lawyer dude who's functioning as a proper citizen in the world, most people avoid how much they can feel.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
That's my experience, but of course my clients are self-selecting, but
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm giving myself permission to switch gears ever so slightly and drop into a level deeper with myself here with you and your
love
viewers.
it.
Um, I've said it a couple times, our maps of ourselves and human intelligence are pretty dog shit. So there's that, which everybody is affected by. I also think that the human emotional interface is not effective. So, how are you feeling? There's a real difference between and tuning in and speaking from the body and a demand to fit it into a narrow window of I'm feeling happy or sad or glad or content. That in and of itself is reductionist. What does that word even mean? Fear and excitement are neighbors. How do we teach our kiddos to connect with the sensing body, adults for that matter? And I'm speaking also to therapy, and I'm speaking to as a neurodivergent person who has 6 different diagnoses and assessments and labels. This emotional thing never made sense to me. And so it's like alexithymia, that's an inability to identify emotions. It's an autistic thing. I'm like, okay, I hear you. But what does that mean? And I have no problem experiencing. Sometimes it's a maelstrom. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it doesn't want to be parsed into labels and language, but it is this deep and intense direct experience. But this emotional interface and this sort of story that was given to me by the pathology paradigm or by this we must label and diagnose, I use it as an invitation to be like, well, what's under that hood? And so the emotional interface is where language and meaning and judgment around emotions and what is okay emotionally and what's not okay meet. And beneath that, there is just a deep well of what is available. And I had to find that for myself as a neurodivergent person. And now I work with my clients doing it in that way. Because when you can get around, the body learns I shouldn't be angry. That may not even register in your conscious awareness, but it's really going to inhibit the flow of your nervous system, your energy, your body, if you have such a judgment on anger that you can't even experience it. Or, the qualities of this anger from this direction, it's fire. What is this
Yeah.
fire here for? What is it protecting? What does it give a shit about? That's a very different question than this top down, like, why is this anger here? What does anger even mean in this context? That's the juicy spot.
That, but you're also speaking about how things are constantly mutating and
Mhm.
changing and converging and diverging and melding. But if
It
we're taught that anger is scary, for example, and you shouldn't be angry,
Mhm.
we don't get a lot of experience of how you can be angry one moment and then it flows into sadness and then it flows into just feeling hot and then it flows into wanting to have sex and then it flows into just being incredibly peaceful and then I mean,
Yeah. Talking about
yeah, the
living
journey.
intelligence.
Yes, that
Yeah.
it's constantly moving and changing. And the more we attend to it, the more it is fluid and it
Right.
sort of,
And
and
all
it
it needs is
moves.
witness. It doesn't need a narrative. It doesn't need a why. Why do you feel angry? Now I have to be a tiny lawyer while I'm 9 years old and activated. So talk about the development of an intellect and it's like it can just catch up. But that attunement you're talking about in childhood or even at the species level, understanding that emotions are energy in motion, they're bioelectrical, biochemical cascades that move around. They're good warm data. Let's not snapshot it and try to explain it away too soon. Can we be with it as it moves? And we all know that, well, you don't all know this, but a lot of us know that when they move, they do move and that they will leave you with these sort of gold nuggets in the pan if you're choosing to work with them, learn how to recognize them. But that is that bottom up afferent, this direction of undifferentiated information to boom, 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 bad, boom, 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 boom. I am bad, boom, 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 boom. I should leave now. Whatever it is comes together.
Yeah, it is very difficult to not bring in the cognitive and make meaning, i.e., judgment about the sensations as they're passing.
Right.
And so they get stagnant or they get stuck or sliced and diced and then distorted in
Yeah.
either overvaluing them or undervaluing them or identifying them or under identifying with them.
And how quickly that cascade moves is wild. So when you
Yeah.
consciously
Yeah.
disrupt with a different, more almost synesthetic approach or creative approach instead of name the emotion on the emotion wheel and it's just one, something very different happens in a lot of these populations that I work with. Also, in order to trust this process or to embark, there is a level of existential and intellectual exploration that not everybody, but a lot of people I work with really want and need that. It's like that love of learning, like I get to learn about how humans human more. Awesome.
Yes, but here's the thing. That default to constantly get a little afferent information from the body, sensational experience, and then immediately want to make meaning of it cognitively. Oh, name it, label it.
Yeah.
Think about its origin, think about its solution, think about that is a habit. It's deeper than a habit. It's almost been an imperative in our cultures
Yeah.
to constantly pop back up into that different part of the brain rather than staying in the sensational experience of it because we're just not that used to it and it can even be
Right.
frightening.
Well, and that's where metacognition that is really hovering at that waterline. I have a client, we have shorthand for it. He calls it the gummy worm on the inside. You stretch time out, time goes slower. And I can play with this space where I watch myself make meaning. If I consciously unlearn, my metacognition is not solution oriented, focus oriented, utility, story, narrative. This penchant for narrative and justification is so fucking ingrained
Yeah. Yeah.
in so many of us. And especially people who are like, hey, you're really good at coming up with answers and making me is, oh, I'm really good at it. Gold star.
Yeah,
We're
I do know.
all, yeah. So that's funny. But there is this place where can I just hang with and observe what is coming into form? And for me, it's like it comes up out of the water and then goes back down in the water and then it has another form. There's a slowness or a suspension of time almost that I experience, but it is this taking my metacognition and just straight up making it meta awareness. It's just straight up watching, observing, listening, witnessing. Whatever comes up is cool. I don't need to make it a shape that it's not. If I notice that I need to make it a shape that it's not, that's good information too. Oh, I don't like that one. Like,
Yeah, but when you're even describing this, you've gotten more animated. And I want to bring in that I know for myself, and I see this with clients as well, that the more there is movement included, the
mhm,
more there's breath included, the more
mm,
there's touch included, we are more likely to be able to stay with the sensational experience
yeah.
rather than pop back up into the cognitive, the verbal.
And now we're talking about energy in the body. When autistic kiddos stim repeatedly,
Ah,
what is that?
yeah.
When ADHD kiddos stim, but their version is get up out of the chair and move around, that is energy in motion, that facilitation of the movement of the warm data. So back to the subtlety of convention. It's sit in the chair and don't move. You're being disruptive. It's ooh. Some kids' movement needs to happen. If you don't let me move it out of my body, I might move it all around into the different scaffolding of meaning.
I do know. And there's somebody called Maskatova. I don't know if we've talked about that before.
Mm-mm.
Absolutely brilliant woman who identified over 200 reflexes that develop naturally in utero and in the first 5 years of our lives, particularly up to 2 years old, but until 5 years. So these myriad reflexes are the physical infrastructure of how we function optimally, but they
Mhm.
affect how we develop our emotionality and our psychology and our social interactions as well.
Mhm.
And she's had huge benefit on the autistic community because with this system, she can discover exactly which reflexes aren't firing properly and get fire again. And people's symptoms, quote unquote, symptoms or difficulties are
Yeah.
greatly alleviated. And I love this idea of this infrastructure of reflexes. I bet there's some correlation. I think I asked that when I took a workshop years ago. Is there any correlation with the meridians and with the energy system? And
Mm.
what happens when certain meridians are flowing or certain reflexes are firing and others just are offline? They're just not even
Yeah.
found, which
Yeah.
is what you're getting into. I think when you're talking about neural pruning too, is that
Yeah.
sometimes it's not that the body stops using certain things, those were never available in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. Stretch your connective tissue density and some sort of physical trauma when you're a kiddo and what gets blocked or the term mind and matter. You've shared that and offered that before. And intelligence is mutable. Repair, change, shift is always possible. The nature of things is change and shift and movement. And so neurodevelopmental differences that are lifelong or real, or neurodivergence, or each person having their own unique neurosomatic fingerprint, that's theirs and it is unique. And it will move with them throughout a lifetime, but how it is maintained, stewarded, what happens to that person, how they respond, how they learn to work with, self relate. It is like a stewardship to develop these skills of nurturing one's own intelligence, care tending that inner experience that's available to all of us. And I think right now, culturally, therapy is probably the place people think to do that, but it is like, something's wrong. I'm not normal. I need to be fixed. Whereas we could just learn to tend to this as a priority. And what benefits would that have individually, collectively? How could that change society? So, what else is possible at the individual through systemic levels? If we did actually give a shit about this stuff and take it seriously, I think that there's so much
Yeah.
that could shift in really positive ways.
Well, I know for myself, considering all the physical damage I've experienced and a variety of sexual traumas and how those have potentially and actually affected my neurology,
Mhm,
my tissues and my neurology and my sensational availability, I would say,
mhm,
is even more vivid to me. A couple days ago, I had this experience of getting to feel how much I can feel and how, despite all that scar tissue, physically and psychologically, I have not just maintained, but increased my capacity to feel. But that has been through literally decades of care, body work, fierce determination to reclaim any and all of my capacities as a body.
mhm.
That's a different society that could provide that or cultivate that, engender that in not just
Yeah.
individuals who have. I can't tell you how many times I've literally spent my last dollar on another healing session because I was so determined not to be any more limited by my body's circumstances or the repercussions of difficult events. Like, how do we change? And as you say, really dislike this word, but our intelligence and our bodies are plastic. They are live wire. They do
Yeah.
mutate, they do transform, they do heal. And in order to expand even more of our sensitivity, even more of our intelligence, even more of our emotionality, our empathy, our pleasure capacity, that takes some effort, at least in my experience. And certainly with our clients, they come to us because they want to invest in that expansion, which
Yeah.
of course not everybody does, whether they can afford it or not.
Yeah, and that drive to expansion we can make the assumption that different neurotypes exist for reasons. We can make
Mhm.
that assumption. And were we to live in accordance with natural intelligence, planetary intelligence, ecosystemic intelligence differently, if we did honor and were able to structure around the innate design of neurodiversity and biodiversity, what would things look like? Yeah, some of ADHD and let's say novelty. So, what role does that kind of person play in a society becomes an interesting question. We've all known probably an accountant or a finance person in our life. That's a very specific kind of, there's almost like I got the walls of the compound kind of thing. Or did you double check to make sure that these things were locked? That fidelity to that detail orientation, beautiful capacity that is in the service of, and then bigger questions of human thriving and experience. Some people are driven to more, some people, different experiences, seekers, explorers, other people. I'm like, I'm very happy right here. And that's great. There's nothing wrong with any of that. For those of us who are more of that explorer type, experiencing different types of intelligence, we're talking about consciousness, and it's what's possible in terms of the human subjective experience, what's possible in terms of my sensing body. And that too is that you don't achieve something. I always laugh, people are like, I'm embodied. I'm like, yes. And it's the fluidity of I can be here, I can be there, I can be over here. The living nature of life is mutable and it moves around. So if people are flowing, if they feel supported, if they feel connected, despite those differences, some people may be very intellectual and they don't really have as much interest in the body stuff. And that's fine.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
okay. If it's presenting a problem or a challenge in their own experience of self, yeah, start exploring it.
Yeah, I love that. Some species are designed to live in the snow and some under the water and some atop mountains. And as you say, we're designed to live in different environments, internally and externally.
Different roles,
Function.
different, yeah.
I want to just mention, though, when you talk about this common denominator of at least a subset of humans, and not just humans, all kinds of animals want to explore. I watch animals all the time toddling around or pecking around in the world, and they're exploring, whether it's for food or for beauty or for whatever it is they're doing. But I think for myself, when you were saying that, my is that really what motivates me,
Mhm,
is wanting to explore? And I don't think that is, honestly.
mhm,
I think for me, it's more that, and my guess is a lot of listeners would feel this way too, is that I feel since I was a little kid, like I had a mission,
mhm,
that I had some drive to become and experience and hopefully contribute this sense of being able to be whole,
mhm,
more whole. And whether that's kind of this mythic, archetypal hero's journey or Jesus's journey or Buddha's journey of becoming a different kind of enlightenment that isn't about just spiritual enlightenment of sitting there on a rock, or it's not about creating some sort of religious atmosphere. It's more about our planet isn't working the way it could or should, and we have to do something about it and redesign every paradigm, it
yeah,
seems.
yeah,
And you and I seem to have this overlapping sense of mission that the body has a whole lot to do with that.
yeah,
Because without it, in my view, and I believe in yours, and probably everybody who's listening, we can't be empathic. We can't be loving. We can't
mm,
enjoy our lives. We can't even access a sense of divine,
mhm,
co creative um, beingness. I don't even know the word. For me, that's what ultimately embodiment is about, is how much can I feel what I am to the extent that my whole soul, spirit, God infiltrates every cell of my being, that there's no separation on a cellular level.
sure,
Do you
sure,
know? And by God, ultimately, I mean love. I mean something that's a benevolent, guiding, designing force of existence. I mean it in that kind of a sense that somehow this slicing, dicing way of being that has extricated ourselves from not just humanity that doesn't look and behave like us, but also from nature, from other species, from the planet herself,
Yeah,
is
yeah,
not going to heal that separation until we are able to paradoxically be so deeply within this unique form that each of us is, so that we can access this greater intelligence that understands that we are not separate and
yeah,
able to
yeah,
feel our communality and our unity. So that's my
absolutely.
soapbox. I hope that was clear.
I'll offer this. I think our understanding of our bodies is deeply existential and spiritual. So when I speak about the nervous system, it's very felt sense first, and we are bioenergetic beings. There's so much happening through us, and that sensing body being a very real thing. So when my threat schema are sufficiently attuned to what I actually believe, there's coherence between present day me and every me that's ever existed. The body is walking memory. Like, we separate and protect when we are cued to separate and protect. So for myself, I want to look both ways across the street because I'm not one with the car that would hit me and kill me. At an atomic level, maybe. At a quantum level, maybe. I'm one with that car and the trees and the cats that were just fighting in my yard a second ago. But there's these layers and levels to matter energy density. I
Yeah.
am not one with the car. So I do want to look both ways across. So I'm not going to compost that particular threat schema. That directive in my body is good. Good, Rachel. Good. Thumbs up, keep, check, positive. Look both ways before you cross the street. So, how do sensitive nervous systems, hypervigilance, sensitive neuroception, trauma, all these things play together to create an experience of separation or connection? But even that, there's like a fluidity there. There's times in which it's okay to be a little bit more, again, the subtlety of the static or the reductionist sneaking into these places. I can be way just blissed out looking at my bird feeder and kind of diffuse, and then I can come into more distinct collection of a me that shows up on a podcast with you.
Yeah.
My
I
thoughts, I can create more, hopefully a little bit more discreet. They're not totally linear, but hopefully they can be followed because they're not just this floodplain of connection, which is beautiful in its own right. So that separation, connection, it's trusting life, trusting self, trusting the inherent safety of a finite human life that is meaningful and also part of something much bigger.
right on, baby. Love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So, as I ask everyone
Mhm.
before wrapping up, and I'm sure your answer is going to be different than it was 2 years
Mm.
ago.
Mhm.
How do you define embodiment now?
What I just said. If we played
Beautiful.
that back, I'm not here to force anybody into a relationship with their sensing body, their sub and unconscious beyond the well-worn realms if they don't want it. But that willingness to be a somanaut, to explore one's own intelligence, one's interiority, not to fix something, maybe to change some things, but to explore in the service of that flexibility of connection. And so that people can really connect with their authenticity and their ability to just move through life less defended, less protected. There's this fragility, but also this defense. It's like, what could we accomplish together if we were able to reconnect in those ways? So, yeah.
And what are you enjoying most about being your particular body right now?
Hmm. I have been in the mornings lately, going back down to the lake. So I live less than a mile from Lake Michigan, and it's been sunny. And just this morning ritual of music and walking to the lake and taking in the light on the water has just been so lovely.
Mm,
Mhm.
beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, Ellie.
Thank you so much, Rachel. You've been such a inspiration and muse and dear friend and guiding light and fantastic business coach as I've been on this journey of how to translate my passions into the world. And you have just been absolutely invaluable in that process and in my heart. So thank you so much for being here with us.
You're happy to
And
be.
listeners, I hope you really enjoyed that because I certainly did.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun. Thanks again. And yeah, I'll see you soon.
You will. Can't
Okay.
get rid of me.
I'm good.
All right, Judy.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening to the Brilliant Body Podcast. To continue exploring your body's brilliance, you can visit the show notes for resources and free events. Also, if you'd like to learn more about working with me, visit alimezey.com. And just one more thing. There's a reason podcasters blather on about ratings and reviews because they truly help these conversations reach more bodies who are ready to reclaim their brilliance too. And it's so easy. You just go to the main page of the show, scroll down and look for those 5 stars and click. And please follow us if you haven't already. And even better, write a rave review. I'd so appreciate it. Until next time, as always, even more than ever, keep reclaiming your brilliant body.